Very good evening to everybody. We have gathered here from far and wide to celebrate a very special publication, From the Plough to the Stars, an anthology of working people's prose from contemporary Ireland. This is in fact the second volume of a pioneering set of anthologies that seek to gather working people's voices from contemporary Ireland. This has never been done before, and I am immensely proud to be part of this venture and to be here today with all of you who have contributed. This Culture Matter project is greater than just a singular publishing event. It is the first joint literary expression of working people's concerns on this scale, with 49 contributors, and it was 67 contributors in the poetry volume, that has been fully embraced and supported by the trade union movement. We are therefore truly honored to have Jay Murphy, president of the ICTU, to say a few words to open this launch. Jay, please.
The trade union movement does have a strong literary tradition and has long been supportive of writers and people generally seeking to communicate from a working class perspective. Their experiences of living in a world that in many respects places a limited value on their existence. It is work that will need to continue, and while I remain in this position, I will continue to support it. From a personal perspective, being asked to participate in a book launch is something I never imagined I would find myself doing. I don't consider myself a literary type, by which I mean one of those people who can effortlessly summon up some wonderful appropriate quote at the right moment from a famous author or illustrate a point or ram home a point. Indeed, being approached to participate in this event made me think about the reading I've been doing in recent years. And I have to say, I haven't been engaging with the great philosophers and the political thinkers or the established literary giants. Rather, I've been stuck in the papers of government, of think tanks, and internal trade union communications. What I am reminded of upon reading the advance copy is that the stories of my youth and the ragged trouser philanthropists that continue to inhabit a very challenging yet colourful and multi-layered world that I and others like me still have much work to do in order to help to bring about improvement. The rich literature within the cover of this book reflects the lives of real people. It reflects their relationships, their experiences, and their emotions. Equally important, it provides a place where a whole community of people, the working class, who traditionally struggle to have their lived experience reflected in the literary world in an unfiltered and honest fashion, can have their say. The other very important contribution this book makes is that it lays bare the uncomfortable truth that all is not how those who would seek to determine the cultural narrative would have us believe. It is a truth that needs to be told, and from the plough to the stars, it is presented in context through the authentic voice of the working class. This authentic voice is essential in raising the consciousness of the wider population and dispelling the myth that we are all in this together. Improving the lives of working people and sharing the benefits of our economy equally are objectives that this book of stories further illustrates, and these are objectives that must be delivered. In addition to the socio-economic importance of this book, there are other things which struck me on a more personal level as I read through it, things that I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten until Grania Daly reminded me in the Dublin Meath saga just how much I, as an Armagh supporter, hated Mick Lyons, the Meath fullback of that era. I'd forgotten that I'd had a bit part in the cement strike as a 12-year-old, protesting as a certain unscrupulous local businessman, now indeed a respected captain of industry from my own neck of the woods, sought to smuggle Blue Circle across the border. Shasa O'Coig touches vividly on a whole series of events that I can relate to. And as a resident of County Armagh, who lives very close to the border, I can completely identify with the Liz Gillis story about the Liberties, the sense of pride in being viewed as other and having within your community people who can, by sheer force of will, banish the negative characterizations which others would force upon you. Bern Butler reminded me of the same heartfelt apology I made internally and often to the Irish working in England when I too first arrived there in the mid-80s in search of work, and made a series of blunders which confirmed to some of them that the potties were indeed thick. And Anne Waters in St. Stephen's Day gives us a story which is echoed in my family and highlights for me that positive change is possible, reminding me to look for the hope beyond the injustice and the pain. These are a few examples of the way in which this anthology evokes a whole series of responses. I was swept along in a torrent of remembrance, both expected and unexpected, challenging and yet ultimately uplifting. This is what good writing does, and it is why these stories are so special. This anthology ensures that the message being communicated is received. The examples I referenced are but a flavour of what this book has to offer the casual reader, and even the casual reader will find it difficult, having been admitted to the working class experience, to dismiss the many injustices, inequalities and barriers that are still to be overcome. As I said in my foreword to the book, this anthology represents an essential element in the struggle to advance the interests of the working class. Finally, I leave you all, writers and would-be writers, with the words of a middle-class writer from an earlier era, Franz Kafka. Don't bend, don't water it down, don't try to make it logical, don't edit your soul according to the fashion. Rather, follow your most intense obsessions mercilessly. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Jay. That was great. Thanks a million. So we saw in the recent general elections in Ireland that in order to keep out the voice of the working class, the ruling class has not only had to come to an arrangement amongst themselves, they have also had to call in the Greens to cling on to power. It is this class that determines the establishment culture and media, dictating what people think and buttressing in this way their economic and political domination. Our anthologies take a stand against the mainstream narrative, mainstream educational assumptions, and mainstream cultural sidelining. I would now like to call on Claire Daly, MEP, who is well known for her fearless stand against the machinations of the ruling class politicians, to launch this book. Claire. Claire? I wonder if Claire has lost us. I know that
you need to unmute.
Yes, Claire, can you unmute, please?
Oh God, you would think after months of all of these COVID meetings that I would have mastered the web meeting at this stage, but sadly not. And apologies, everybody. I mean, really, I cannot overstate how honoured and humbled I am to be with you all tonight. And I certainly wasn't going to let a visit to the dentist and a swollen face get in the way of that, because I spent the last 2 weeks studying a printed version of your wonderful anthology from my computer, and then the postman brought the finished version the other day, and I have to say it really is an absolutely beautiful production. And genuinely, my preparation for this event was one of the most enjoyable preparations I've ever had for an event or a meeting, because this is an extremely powerful book. I mean, every individual piece of writing is powerful, but presented as it is, as an anthology, it really is a profound and moving statement, way bigger than the sum of its parts. Like the working class itself, its strength emerges from your coming together. And I found early on that I was never going to do all of you sufficient justice in this launch. It was just going to be impossible when we have 50 such absolutely excellent contributions. I couldn't possibly square that circle. So all I can say in my opening remarks, to quote some prose from my leaving cert, which was not as contemporary as the ones I've had the pleasure of reading that you yourselves have produced. But Robert Louis Stevenson, when he said that a man would have written a book on travels in Montenegro, is no reason why he shouldn't have been to Richmond. In other words, that I may talk or comment on some of your scripts is no slur on the others. It just means that maybe it wasn't the right quote for the right time. And truly, my total respect goes out to all of you, because the immediate thing that leaps out of you for you in this book is the incredible weightiness of the writing. You know, they're really short pieces, but each one is emotionally charged. They kind of get in on you. You find yourself fighting back the tears and actually not succeeding in a few of them. You know who ye are for those ones. But while it would be a mistake to describe this as a pessimistic book, we can't ignore that there's a lot of hardship in here. Many of the pieces are about a world weariness, an awareness of life as something that happens to you, that transforms you, that leaves its mark on you. You know, there's certain things that come up again and again. The experience of being undervalued by society, of being looked down on, treated with no respect. We see the effects of the neglect of working class life in our society. We see the lack of social support and the social and individual problems that this creates, the loneliness, the psychological illness, the addiction, the antisocial behavior. And then we also have the experience of imperialism and what it has done to our country. Not only the lives it has ruined, but the wedges that it has driven between our different communities in Ireland, how it's taken away our language and wrongly simplified the complexity of our history. And you know, for me, I found the sections on the Irish language, which is featured strongly in a whole number of contributions, really struck me substantially, because I never really thought about the importance of the Irish language until I've lived outside of Ireland, which I do now in Brussels. We see Irish recognised as an EU language, but probably only one of the MEPs can even speak it. So it rarely gets utilised. Meanwhile, the Catalans, with more than twice our population, are desperately clamouring to have their language recognised. And for me, Tomás Maximon's Ballyferma Enigma really was a revelation. I mean, he's talk about the Liffey Gales, the vibrancy and the thriving of educating people in Ballyfermot to a love of Irish, a connection with the Gaeltacht area, with no help whatsoever from official Irish society. And he makes the points that it kind of, the way they teach Irish in schools demonstrates that really, do they want to deliberately keep it obscure? He said, maybe in his words, he said, did they want to devise a Gaelic speaking Mandarin class to administer the new quasi-independent Irish state, to keep the working class excluded? And that was just walloped me over the head, because that's exactly what they were doing. They have debased the Irish language and presented it in such a way as to make it alien from the people who should embrace it. But you know, when you look at it, our language is the identity that we can't escape from. And even when we don't realize it or recognize it, and in so many of the pieces that deal with the Irish language, it was inspiring to see the efforts made by working class people north and south of the border, from the Protestant community and so on, to revitalize Irish. And it's out of those embers that that language will be saved. And that to me is a powerful thread going throughout this anthology. I think in another powerful example really in many of the pieces is the awareness of the violent changes that have been carried out by capitalism, the transformation of our environment and our surroundings, the sensation of the ground changing under us, our communities, you know, changing around us, never being the same again, the experience of emigration, of looking for work, the experiencing of knowing that you can never go home because it's gone, the memories of home, the experience of being unhomed, the experience of the subsequent generations of the diaspora feeling as if you've never really know where you came from and you don't really belong where you are. Powerful, powerful contributions. But, you know, for all of the pain and the loss and the longing that this book deals with, more than anything for me, these stories are about resilience. And I absolutely love the portrayal of the menial drudgery of work. It reminded me so much of the time when I worked in Dublin Airport in Aer Lingus catering. The camaraderie, the togetherness in the stories like the Ponds factory or the guy Jack who died having worked 15 years on a pizza factory assembly line, and how the manager couldn't remember his name, what he had looked at. And it was really poignant for me, particularly during these COVID times, because it brought me back to my days in the airport. And ironically, COVID has ruined that workplace where I once was, where once 500-600 workers labored together, raised children, you know, I suppose, remembered dead colleagues and lived their lives together. During COVID, Aer Lingus Catering shut its doors, and COVID itself features very strongly in this book. The impact on family, the impact on workers, and how we have had to reevaluate what's important in our lives because of these changed times. And for me, a lot of the stories really, and what they bring out, is about perseverance, putting up with things with grace, with dignity, making the most of it, surviving, as it were, understanding that things could be worse and sparing a thought for those who have it worse than us. And, you know, in all of it, there is a sense of pride in that perseverance, a knowledge that this is what we do because we have to. And I think it's this pride and resilience that is a huge part of the identity that this book represents in an incredibly powerful way. But equally, the other side of the coin of identity is community. And the working class identity is always about living among people. And that's why solidarity features so strongly and is so important in the book. There are many examples of it. We had the manager who went on strike along with his sacked workers, the community organisers in the Liberties, the old lady whose loneliness and isolation is ended by making scones for the water charges protesters. We're all in this together. And it's powerful when we read these testimonies together. And I think that's why, I suppose, family equally features very importantly in this writing. Not, of course, the nuclear family or the traditional family or the idealized family, but family that's found in real life, imperfect, fractured, often maddening, a lot difficult, but precious and important anyway. And for me, some of the most effective moments and stories that are outlined in this anthology are the ones that deal with family. It's the ordinariness of living together, how love is revealed in the little things. The father writing home to his daughter about the extra socket that he put in her bedroom. For me, it was hearing about the mother whose first car, when she separated from the husband and moved the family to Tala, and her first car was a Datsun Cherry, and they could rub the rust off the side of it. And I can tell you, but they loved that car. And that related to me because my first car was a Datsun Sunny and it was bright chicken yellow. And I can tell you, when we rubbed our hands off the side of that car, the rust did come away, but it represented freedom. And it was a huge importance in a stage in my life, as it seemed to be in that story as well. And I think it's in the portraits of families that we see mutual recognition of the frailty among family members. I think in particular, in terms of the portrayals of motherhood, which feature in a lot of the writings. It's a frank expression, really, of what is one of the main pillars of working class life, which in many instances would never survive without the mother. I think families are also our ties to the past, and much of the writing reaches out for a sense of permanence in families. It tells the stories about where each of us comes from and who we are. I mean, for me, it talked of parents, of grandparents, of their lives before we were part of them. It was about looking back in the eyes of an adult, understanding the sacrifices that were made for us, the questions that we never asked. I mean, I knew I was going to cry reading this bit, but for me, just articulated beautifully in Lanny O'Hanlon's piece, If You Were the Only Girl. What an incredible piece of writing for me, when she said, beyond these roles that we are all assigned, mother, daughter, sister, granddaughter, grandmother, there are women with their own inner lives and stories. And there are so many questions that I want to ask, but for the most part of my life, I was looking the other way, away from the matrilineal line, though it lives and breathes through me, the fear of abandonment, the strong rhythm of our feet on old boards, Rosie singing at a party, the break in her voice. I mean, it's the authenticity that really puts chills down your spine. And, you know, pulling this anthology together, you have to say that the common experience of hardship and suffering is not an accident. It's not a universal truth of being alive. It's not written in stone that life has to be like this. But what it is a recognition of a great wrong and an ongoing wrong, a wrong of a society that is deliberately organized in an unequal way so that most people lead difficult lives so that a very small few can live like gods on earth. And that's the reality of class and class oppression. And this book bears witness to that oppression. It bears witness to the grace and humor and diligence and the love of people who bear that oppression and lead their lives anyway. I mean, if you haven't read the book yet, who is going to not whoop for joy in Anne Mcderby Beck's sick day when we deal with a council worker being faced with the abuse from the public and a disgusting manager who undermines her every step, and she gets her justice by saying, do you know what? I'm going sick tomorrow and you can deal with this yourself. And everybody just goes, yes, we are the ones with the power. It's the working class that is the soul of the world. It's our hands that make the human world and everything in it. And it's only the working class that can remake the world as something better. And that's why a book like this is so important. You know, literature and writing has a reputation for being something that only the high and mighty can have. But actually, do you know what? That's just a jealous sort of a grasping middle class prejudice. It's there to monolize culture and the right to participate. And it's kind of there to scare working class people off, as if writing is something that we doesn't belong to us. And the reason for that is very clear, because working class literacy and literature is dangerous to the establishment, because knowledge is power. Writing is not something lofty or exclusive. It's actually something pretty practical and ordinary and necessary. We shape the world first with our imagination and then with our hands. As Rosemary Jenkinson said in This Year Is Cancelled, Lockdown Musings from Belfast 29th to the 5th, 2020, where she subverts that middle class prejudice and writes that she never regarded herself as privileged writer, but actually that she was part of a working tradition. To me, she says, I'm in the construction industry and I'm a builder, building stories that will last much longer than these jerry-built social housing flats at the end of my street. And I think she's right. I think the importance of this book is that it too is in the construction industry, in upholding, supporting, and promoting working class writing. It's building working class power, because it's through writing that the working class takes power over its own representation. It shapes how it sees itself, and it describes the world as it actually is. To foster self-understanding, to make working class identity, to recognize it, to be proud of it, and to be able to imagine together a world we can then build that's better than the ones we have today. Now, we all know that something like that could really take off very quickly. And that's why It's not encouraged, because it's a threat to the ruling order. And that's why the work that you've all collectively worked together on is so powerful and so important. And long may it go on. And congratulations to all of you. And a special congratulations to the wonderful Jenny Farrell for her diligence with this and her consistency in bringing this project to life. And just in ending, can I say and quote the words of Celia Dufresne in a way in which to overturn the pecking order. Long may you continue, so that we might stand in a relay of thunderous applause, once more to celebrate a future normal, in which all lowly paid, inadequately clad workers who risk their lives while looking after the ill and dying receive their just reward. Into that future we face, mindful of the words of James Connolly. Our demands are modest. We only want the earth. So let the evening begin. Let the readers commence. Your book is going to stay with me for a very, very long time. I really salute you, one and all. Thank you so much for your creativity.
Thank you very, very much, Claire. That was brilliant. And I think everybody appreciates your words very, very much. Just before we do start the reading, I would like Mike Quill just to say a very few words, as he is the editor-in-chief of Culture Matters. And if the truth were told, he is the man who actually came up with the idea. So over to Mike.
Thank you. Golly, I really don't know how to carry on after that sort of eloquence at all. But it's really a series of thank yous that I want to give briefly tonight. Thanks to Jenny. Thanks for your email last night, Jenny, saying that the book had gone viral. I thought, oh, that's amazing for about 2 minutes. And then I thought, hang on, going viral these days, perhaps it hasn't got the positive connotations that it used to have. But yeah, so first of all, thanks to the speakers we've just heard. You know, Jerry and the Irish Labour movement have just been fantastic in their support for this project. There's the Irish Labour movement it gets the value of not just the economic and political struggles, but the cultural struggle for a better world, the struggle that we face to write well and then get published in a literary landscape and an industry which is dominated by non-working class authors and non-working class publishers and non-working class themes and experiences. And it's a struggle to get our lives, our experiences, our emotions and imaginings represented in stories, poems, memoirs and plays. I want to say thank you to Jenny for the sheer hard work that she's put into the book, a tireless attention to detail, and the wonderful introduction, the literary and political insights in that, which I'd commend as a model combination of politically aware literary criticism. As for the book itself, well, I mean, it just is I'm so proud of it. It's so different. You know, you go into a bookshop, you won't see anything like it, I don't think. It's so authentic, so genuinely grassroots, so expressive of the experience, the truth and realities of working class life. It doesn't have kind of literary pretensions in the sense of, you know, this is how clever I am with words, but it's got the old-fashioned great literary value of telling the truth. And what's more, as Jerry was saying, it's got political value because of the way it foregrounds class issues in the wonderful little biographies before the pieces, as well as the pieces themselves. I really think it's such a valuable contribution to raising and valuing class consciousness at a time when it's never been more sorely needed. And it's a rebuke and a challenge to the mainstream literary and publishing establishment, I think, and a political challenge to their cultural power. Most of all, though, it's obviously thanks to the contributors who, at the end of the day, have done most of the work in writing all the pieces. Mary Lennon, I think, speaks for us all when she says in her biography, "Books are about other lives, not ours." Declan Hegarty speaks for us all, I think, when he says, "Ireland has a problem with class prejudice, and I hope to be part of breaking it with my writing." Too right, Declan. I think we're all behind you in that one. But most poetically of all, I thought Celia de Frenia spoke for us all when she says of this kind of writing, she says, "In this way, a cluster of pearls might be created to upend the status quo." How inspiring is that? So thank you for giving us at Culture Matters the privilege of publishing this metaphorical cluster of pearls, which stretches metaphorically from the plough to the stars. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. That was another kind of contribution to round off the whole of the opening speeches. I just want to say, I don't know if Jerry and Claire can see the chat. If you were to click on the chat, you would be able to read how many people have responded and thanked you for your speeches and your remarks. I don't want to read them out now, there are far too many, but if you want to click on chat, you will find them there. Okay, so given our time constraints, I will now, without further ado, call on the contributors who have offered to read for us tonight. We have limited the time per reader to 5 minutes, and we are aware that there are many who will not be reading. Our sample is less than 30%, but it will be representative. Please remember to keep your microphones muted, to cancel out all background noises, and only to switch on the microphones and cameras when you are reading, so that we can see and hear you, please, when it is your turn. So I am going in alphabetical order, as I always do. And our first 6 readers span the length and breadth of the country, both rural and urban, from Cork to Dublin to Galway. They will be in order: Patrick Bolger, Bern Butler, Kevin Doyle, Attractor Fahy, Rachel Hegarty, and Kevin Higgins will be the first 6 in that order, but I will introduce everybody just very briefly so that we know who is going to speak. So first will be Patrick Bolger. Patrick was born into a working class family in rural County Wicklow and gives voice to issues that are often silenced and marginalized in Irish society. He will read from his poignant memoir, Revelation, on page 13, if anybody wants to follow the reading. Patrick.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Mike, and Claire. Thank you for your wonderful speech. Just a very short explanation, because it's hard to extract a small piece from a longer piece. This piece of writing is about a day in 1998 when I, for the first time after 16 years, confronted the childhood sexual violence I'd experienced at the hands of a Catholic paedophile priest. 38 years later, I'm still dealing with it, and I'm still dealing with the silence. And I suppose my interest is in the silence, not alone of the cleric, of the church, but of the establishment and of the community and of family, and where that sits for people who have experienced such violence. So thank you. I feel really privileged to be part of this. So thank you all very much. There were 3 christenings. I would be alone with him for the whole day. Later, in a small brown envelope, there would be some money, notes, from the christening families, or him, who knows, for the altar boy. Maybe it made him feel better to pay me. Maybe it cleared his conscience. During the christening, he would mark the baby's head, chrism, wet his head, water, then the renewal of vows. With the goodbyes and the thanks out of the way, we would drive the short distance back to his house. He walked ahead of me, opened the door, invited me in. The door closed behind him. Him or me, I cannot remember. In his living room, he put me sitting on a couch. He sat back in a leather chair, leaned back in it, looked at me up and down. His right arm fell over the side, rested on a piece of wooden furniture. He turned it around, speaking to me, those eyes fixed on me. I saw cans of Coke and orange stacked neatly. If you come sit on my knee, you can have one of these. Later, I would drink my Coke. We would go back to the church, another christening, chrism, oil, water, candles, rejection of Satan, and all his empty promises. A small brown envelope for the altar boy. A quiet drive back around the tan bank, past the football field, over the bridge, the swallows darting in and out as if the wind alone were holding them up. Left and right, into my driveway. My father's arm raised in salute, his wiry hand on the gear stick, his eyes and his wicked smile, the last thing I remember. Thank you, Father, for looking after him. August 1998. I'm staring at his photograph in the paper, Tom Naughton, Father Thomas Naughton, being escorted from court after being convicted of the sexual abuse of Mervyn Rundle and Donna Carney in 1985. I hadn't seen his face since 1982, 16 years. It was all I remembered it to be. My head is spinning as I drive over the bridge. I walked across this bridge 1,000 times, with Linda first, then Michael and Lorna and Damien, and alone. I had stood alone on this bridge in the dark and cold with the wind whipping off the hills, and I had cried, and I had screamed, and I had begged for the pain to go away. I cursed God. I embraced Satan. I lay crumpled. Too strong to die, too afraid. I stared into the black on dark moonless nights, and on frosty nights with the moon full, I saw the reflections, heard the water lap gently against the pillars below. I drive off the bridge, past the football field, where my father's dreams for me died, around the tan bank and up the small incline towards the curate's house. I was parked and out of my car before I knew where I was. I don't remember ringing the doorbell. I don't remember how I felt. Richard Cantwell, parish priest, opened the door. I stood silently and broken words fell from his mouth. I wondered who would be first. It's a strange thing about a small country village. Gossip would spread on the wind like a lit fire through the heather and firs on the hills. Some things, however, seemed to be beyond words. Things involving sex and abuse and rape and boys and a priest. They were things that could never be let take light. He told me he would have to inform the archdiocese, as if they didn't already know. He told me that they would have to inform the guards, as if they also didn't already know. He told me that I was brave. He told me that there were many more. He knew of some, as did I. We all knew of others. That night in Ballymount and the nights to come and the mornings after, mothers sat and looked at quiet men eating dinner. Fathers spent late nights in. Men in pubs drank silently and deeply or laughed too much. What else was there to do? What else was there to do? You find a way to survive, or you find a way to die. Neither, as it happens, is a life. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. That is obviously very moving, and thank you for reading. So next then would be Bern Butler, who grew up in Chantala in Galway, one of the city's first built council estates. She was born into a family of 8 children. She would like to live in Chantala again, but cannot afford to do so now. She will read from her memoir, A Tale of Two Cities, 1985, which begins on page 23. Bern, I call on you. Can you?
Hi, can you hear
okay,
me?
perfect. Yes, we can see and hear you. Excellent.
Hi. Great. Okay. Hi, Jenny. And first of all, big thanks to you. Thanks to you. Your work has been amazing. And I've always been really impressed by how quickly you get back to me. And I assumed you were doing it for everybody else as well. So I just think that's an amazing amount of work for one person to be engaged in for such a long period of time. And I think I have good respect for hard work. So well done and thank you. And thanks to Mike as well. It's very hard to follow the piece that Patrick's just read. I was delighted to see that his piece was first placed in the book because it's just such an important story that needs to be told and retold over again and again. So I feel my own contribution at the moment is going to be kind of trite almost in comparison to that. So thanks, Patrick. So my piece is called A Tale of Two Cities, 1985, because I was moving from, well, not moving, but a student, and I was getting a summer job in London. And the piece I'm going to read is about my father and the influence my father had on me, and also just working in a factory. It was a big, huge factory, and just how a big a thing that was, how big an impression it made on me. So I'm just going to go straight into it. I had borrowed £100 from my father back in Galway to help see me through the first couple of weeks of my summer in London. I was a student. It was all the money I had, and it was running out. I was worried about not finding work and becoming a burden on my older sister, who was putting me up. I was also worried about the possibility of not being able to pay my father back. This concern loomed larger than it might normally have done, because my father, who had worked for decades as a fitter in Galway Regional Hospital, was on strike. The strike arose out of an incident when one of my father's colleagues, reputedly, in an argument with the foreman, punched him. My father was also a foreman, but not long promoted to that position. The man who threw the punch was quickly fired, and his colleagues went out on strike in support of what they saw as unfair dismissal. My father, taking a stance against the management he had just joined, went out on strike with his colleagues. What I recall feeling at that time is youthful, naive admiration, because my father was supporting the underdog, sticking to his principles and putting himself on the line. He was a hero in my eyes. This made the business then of my paying my father back a matter of principle for me. I was desperately keen to show that I could repay the money and honour the trust my father had placed in me by lending it, especially under such dire circumstances. At the time of the strike, 4 of my 7 siblings, including myself ordinarily, were still living at home, only one working. Certainly not the best of times. On the suggestion of my sister in London, I went looking for work in Pond's, the makers of Vaseline skin lotions and a host of other cosmetics. My sister had heard they took on people for the summer and the money was reasonable. So I did an interview, and hey ho, I got the job. The Pond's factory was located on the Victoria Road in northwest London. Sorry. In a huge red brick building, looking like it was built during the Industrial Revolution. Inside was a vast space made up of adjoining sheds with brickwork painted white. The ceiling was high as a cathedral. Instead of pillars, they were crisscross metal structures like arms of cranes or electricity pylons. The air rang with the sound of whirring machines, with bottles and jars, both plastic and glass, clinking and rattling as they bobbed in thousands along assembly lines, stretching the length of the building. Each assembly line was manned at junctures by workers, mostly women, placing empty vessels on the conveyor belt or further along, capping, labeling, testing, or packing the finished product. They put me on the cocoa butter line. Another Irish woman trained me in. My job was to stock the moving conveyor belt with empty plastic containers. Opposite the workstation at which we stood, an arm's reach across the conveyor belt, sat a huge vat of empty cream-coloured bottles with a small section cut out at the bottom of the vat. The job was to reach across, pick up the bottles, and once the conveyor belt had started, place them on the belt without leaving any gaps. This meant your hands had to move like the clappers. In addition, when you had caught up with yourself and you could see the vat was emptying, you had to run around the back of it, rip open a giant-sized new bag of bottles, or more if you were quick enough, and fill up the vat. Then run back around to the conveyor belt, picking up where you'd left off. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Bern. That was great. Thank you. We'll move on to Kevin Doyle, who is joining us from Cork. Kevin is from a working class background in Cork. He attended college and later worked in the chemical industry in Ireland and in the USA. He's also the author of 2 political crime thrillers, and he will read an extract from his short story, The Water War. Kevin?
Thank you, Jenny.
Oh, good. We see you and hear you. Brilliant. You're welcome.
I'm going to read from the screen in front of me, which might be easier for me. Hopefully it'll come out okay though. But a big thanks to you, Jenny, for all the work in bringing together such a wonderful anthology, and a big thanks also to Claire and Michael for their inspiring speeches beforehand. So I'm really honoured to be a part of this collection as well. And the story, I'll read a short excerpt from it, is connected to the anti-water tax campaign. And a lot of people down in Cork like to think that it really got started in Cork back at the time. And I was lucky enough to go out near one of the housing estates where the campaign took off. And this is an excerpt, somewhat remembered, of those inspiring days when people did actually stop austerity, which was a big step forward for all of us. She was sitting outside her house on a mauve two-person sofa. There on its own, the piece of furniture looked like something from a movie set, garish, worn. The sun was shining and she looked relaxed, bemused. Across from where she was sitting, a man lay prone on the road and he was screaming. He had everyone's attention. Over my dead body, he shouted. Above him, precariously positioned on the rear of a flatbed truck, a yellow mini digger was threatening to dismount along tracks that would have taken the heavy machine directly onto the belly of the prone protester. There was pandemonium. Local people were jostling and shouting at the Irish water workers, trying to push them back. A woman pounded on the truck's cabin window. No water meters here, no water meters here, no to austerity. When the Gardaí arrived, the crowd moved closer together around the truck as if for protection. I stood back, a bit unsure, uncertain. I was really worried for the man on the road. I could see an accident happening, a life being lost. During the lull, a voice called out, "Would you take a picture of me?" I looked and saw a woman, a bit younger than me, sitting on her sofa. I want to send it to my daughter in Australia. I want to prove to her that we're doing something at last, that we're fighting austerity. I went over reluctantly, and she handed me her mobile phone. She posed. Take one this way, now that way, now the other way. We did side profile to the right, side profile to the left. Finally, she swept her long hair back behind her head and asked, "How's this?" "You think that will work for your daughter?" I said. She smiled. "That's not for my daughter, it's for you." I laughed and looked at the photo. "Very beautiful," I said, showing her. "Charmer." She stood, straightened her clothes and pulled her cardigan closed around her. "Will you have a cup of tea?" I looked over at the ruckus. It was stalemate. "I will," I answered. "Then hold the fort." She pointed to her sofa and fetched a pillow, plumping it up for me to sit against. "The water supply stopcock is directly underneath the sofa. Don't let anyone near it. Austerity's not coming in my gate." I sat down. The sofa was positioned on the public footpath just outside her front gate. Right along, up and down the estate, as far as I could see, her neighbours were similarly camped outside their houses on similar items of home furniture. It was a big protest. Just 2 houses further on, they had the full kitchen table set, put out, and were playing cards. Further along again, near a stretch of park, the invading army of Irish water meter installers were parked at a standstill. Flatbed trucks, JCBs, and the Jeeps were lined up army column style. A few men in suits were talking to an older man with white hair in a high-vis vest. Over my dead body was still screaming with all his might from close by. It was becoming clear, however, that he had won the day. The installation of water meters had stopped. "I'm Karen," she said when she came back out to ask me if I wanted milk or sugar. "Just milk." She handed me her phone with all her photos on it. "Choose one for my daughter." When she returned, I showed her the one that I felt made the strongest statement. It showed Karen sitting defiantly cross-legged, looking across the road at the protest. She was neither scolding or smiling in the photo. She looked determined. "Perfect," she agreed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you very much. That brings back a lot of memories, doesn't it? The water campaigns. Anyway, we move on to Attracta Fahy now, who grew up in a farm in East Galway. She trained as a nurse, later worked in social care before training as a psychotherapist. Attracta continues to advocate for and work with the most vulnerable in society, and she will read from Mothering Through the Pandemic, starting on page 57. Attractor.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, everyone. And this is a beautiful introduction. It was so powerful. It was lovely listening to the background and Claire's very powerful response to the anthology. And I'm very privileged to be part of it. So my piece is Mothering Through the Pandemic. And I just want to say well done to the readers who've read before me. So this is a piece, Mothering Through the Pandemic. It's been weeks since my eldest son posted on Instagram. He's 34, and I still worry about him living at 6,000 miles away in Los Angeles, in a country in turmoil. He works as an anesthesiologist. The front line is a very traumatic place to be as the coronavirus sweeps across the United States. It had been contained in California, but as everything opened up, a new wave emerged. I miss his posts. That one daily photo is part of how I connect to reassure myself that he's okay. We talked over the months, his pain and not being able to save patients, daily deaths from the virus, 10 in one day. He calls work a death camp. It's terrible to lose a patient. Even worse, watching them die without loved ones. Seeing body bags waiting to be removed is the worst. No, actually, it's when you have patients waiting for a ventilator, knowing another of your patients has to die first. It's awful, Mum. We have all heard these stories, the mayhem in hospitals, tragedy, loss, and pain. We hear daily numbers of those who died and the loss of traditional rituals when burying our dead. This virus, like a comet, came shooting in, wreaking havoc. Every tragic story reflects how susceptible we are to trauma. It's as if there's a broken mirror spinning somewhere in orbit, reflecting back the state of our world. Not least showing us who cares about the vulnerable in our society and who cares about humanity. Hearing the stories of others is one thing. Hearing your son's experience is somewhat different. His words hammer and splinter through my body. My pain is knowing that I cannot take it from him. So I stay strong, seeing the importance of mirroring to children how to face adversity. It's difficult to listen to horror, but knowing how to listen when one needs to be heard encourages me to give that space. Offloading a burden or sharing turmoil relieves pressure and distress from the perpetual tumult of trauma, which many healthcare workers have experienced. Being aware of how trauma gets into the body if not heard, often presenting as illness, anxiety, or depression, I stay mindful, creating the space he needs to share. It's amazing how a person finds strength when heard with empathy. Growing up on a farm and having a background in nursing gave me a strong foundation to accept the darker, traumatic side of life. Besides, being a caretaker is my nature. This can be a curse or a blessing. Right now, it's the latter. These days when I phone, he rarely answers, sends a message, all okay, I'm at work. His response when asked how he is usually, grand, really busy. Grand means so many things for us Irish, but in this case, I take it to mean getting on with it. Occasionally, I receive a flurry of texts updating me on how terrible it is, but once again, he's grand. We used to chat weekly as we both have a mischievous nature and we'd laugh a lot. Now it's several weeks since we've spoken. I suspect he doesn't want to break down and cry, as he has done several times. He possibly doesn't want to feel vulnerable right now. He lost his closest friend, a family friend, to COVID, so we are all grieving. He also lost 2 colleagues. Maybe there's a wisdom in not calling. We have to find our own individual path through grief. Separateness gives us space to do this, and there is a solace in knowing we are there for one another when needed. I know it is difficult for him to keep up a pretense, and as a mother, I pick up on his mood. He knows I will ask. He needs his defense and persona to get through. I think of the quote from Galib. My fingernails are clawing down towards my heart again. It must be the right time for planting tulips. Thank you all.
Thank you very, very much, Attracta. I think we could all identify with parts of that, surely, what we've all kind of experienced over the last few months. So thank you very much. We move on to Rachel Hegarty. And Rachel, I hope you're there. Rachel was reared in the working class neighborhood of Finglas, and it is now widely published and broadcast. She is reading from her short story, The Dodgy Box, which begins on page 74. Rachel, are you there?
Thanks very much.
Oh,
yeah.
There you are. Perfect.
Thank you so much, Jenny. This is gift, and big thanks to Jerry from the trade unions and to Claire for that rousing speech, and of course to Michael for putting it all together, like the inker that he is. And it's a great honor to be reading here with all my comrade writers. So thanks very much, everybody. The Dodgy Box. Debbie held the piece of paper with the address on it in her hand. The walk between Artane and Darndale roundabouts was longer than she had reckoned. A hot day. The air was close and her hands were sweating loads. Her day off. By rights she should be taking a paddle in the waves at Dollymount. But no. Here she was making her way to one of the dodgier estates to buy a dodgy box from an uncle of the young fella in the warehouse. She felt the piece of paper in her fist. It was limp with her sweat. She stuffed the small square of paper into her side pocket. No worries. She'd remember the address. 14 Bluebell Avenue. Bluebell Avenue. Jesus knows when this place last saw bluebells. All Debbie could see were grey paths and tarmac roads. There must be some muppet in the corpo with a weird sense of humour. The more ropey the neighbourhood, the more poetic the names. Dolphin's Barn, Cherry Orchard. They made it sound like a day out in the country, when really they were good places for scording gear. The poetic place names and the height of speed bumps were a bit of a giveaway. Speed bumps so high they could do as much damage to a car as the spikes from a Garda Stinger. Mad high speed bumps plus poetic place names equals one interesting neighbourhood. Debbie would tell them these telltale signs to her kids if they were ever in a position to afford to go looking for a place of their own. Chance would be a fine thing. The heat was killing. She wished she hadn't worn jeans, but her second eldest had said she looked like a muppet in her sundress. And now even she saw the sense of not looking like a muppet in this estate. Some of the houses had iron shutters over the windows and front doors. Debbie wondered what kind of antisocial behaviour would get a family kicked out of here. And where were they putting them? The local authorities were the most antisocial of them all, throwing families out on the road and into the hell of homeless services. One good thing about this pandemic, no more evictions. People talked of the second wave. People talked of a hard lockdown. People talked of how the pandemic would make the winter longer, would make the winter harder. But all Debbie wanted was a dodgy box. There was no way they could get through a winter lockdown and them having nothing to do but watch the free TV. Sweating or not, the sunny weather made for an easier lockdown. Christ, if it had been one of those wet, miserable summers and a global pandemic, there would have been tons of people leaping into the Liffey. Debbie needed the dodgy box for her family's sanity. 2 adults, 3 teenagers, and 2 little kids would need all the channels they could get. COVID-19 was shite. Debbie could use as much digital distraction as possible. Cost was a factor. A dodgy box was the answer. Thanks very much.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks a million, Rachel. That was very, very good. That is one bit of resilience, certainly, and inventiveness and so on. And I think we can identify with that, certainly. Okay, so Kevin Higgins is next. And Kevin Higgins was born in London of Irish parents. He grew up in Galway. He lived in London again during his 20s. Since 2003, he has been doing what we in Galway know him best for, I suppose. He has been making his living as a creative writing tutor and poetry workshop facilitator. His text now echoes Kevin Doyle's Water War in Kevin Higgins's satirical blog on page 79. Kevin, please.
Okay. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you to, I think it's great the way that Jenny and Mike Quill have become two of the heroine and hero of Irish literature. It's a bit like Father Ted. Father Ted, hugely popular in Ireland, had to be made by Channel 4, and it's quite funny that it took a British-based publisher to do this. So I think congratulations and to Claire for that brilliant speech, which I think should be published itself. And it's great to see so many friends here. I wrote this piece as a blog piece in 2014 when the Irish water controversy was going on. It's really short. And there were various people saying, well, most people think it's a very good idea. The silent majority, Nixon used to talk about the silent majority as well, think it's a really good idea. And so I suggested, well, why don't you organize a demonstration in favor of water charges? So I wrote this, vigil in, as if it was being called, a vigil in support of Irish water, called during Shannon vote on Wednesday. And one senator tweeted to me and said, that's a great idea. I think we should organize this. Can you private message me? So he believed it. You'll always get one. Vigil in support of Irish water during Shannon vote on Wednesday. Economist Dan O'Brien and distinguished University of Limerick academic Heather Kirby have come together to organise a vigil in support of Irish water, which will take place this Wednesday, December the 17th, from 6 p.m. outside the gates of Leinster House. The vigil is timed to coincide with the Shannon's vote on the Irish water bill. In a joint statement issued last night, O'Brien and Kirby said, it has become clear to us that there is a serious danger that the Irish water bill could be defeated in the Shannon on Wednesday. In normal circumstances, this would only force a delay of 3 months. But given all that has happened, such a delay might prove terminal. We have come together to call on the Irish people to assemble at the gates of our national parliament to help soften the spine of those few wavering senators, more than a few of whom we have met personally at dinner parties. If this bill is defeated in the Shannon, it could lead to the collapse of Irish water, which would represent a huge victory for the forces of uncouthness and general smelliness. We feel it's time bold economists and academics came together and united against our common enemy. We have nothing to lose but our immense opinion of ourselves. Speakers will include Senator Ivana Bacik, Cathy Sheridan of the Irish Times, and Fionn Sheehan of the Irish Independent, who has vowed to turn up wearing underpants made exclusively from the hair of Dennis O'Brien. It is also hoped that Clarence Thomas of the US Supreme Court will be in attendance and speak at the event. As communications consultant Terry Crone has advised the organizers, it is always handy to have a black guy on board to soften the image when you're trying to set up something like Irish water. There will also, we hope, be ecumenical prayers led by some Church of Ireland bishop or other. If anyone knows any such bishops, or even someone who's prepared to spend the evening pretending to be a vicar, give us a call on 1890-448-448. We'd be happy to slip such a vicar a few euros and maybe set him up with a nice girl for afterwards. Thank you very much. When I mocked bald economists 6 years ago, I had a lot more hair myself.
Well, thank you very, very much, Kevin. That was very funny and very entertaining. Thank you. And of course, it has its serious meaning to it. Can I just say before I move on to all our readers that do keep an eye on the chat, because people are commenting on your reading and I wouldn't like you to miss it. And as I said, I can't read those out as well because there are too many, but just go to the chat and see how people are responding to your work and your reading. Okay, now, as you know, the readers were invited. It was entirely voluntary. Nobody was coerced into reading anything like that. So I am glad that two people volunteered to read who are joining us from the 6 counties. There are many more contributors from the north of Ireland, but 2 people actually volunteered to read. They are Paul Jeffcott and Rosemary Jenkinson, and I will call on them in turn. They're both reading from memoirs. We begin with Paul Jeffcott, simply because he comes first in the alphabet. So his father worked in a factory and his mother worked in an office. Paul became the first member of his extended family to go to university, and he started writing. He lives in County Down. He will be reading from his memoir, and it's on page 86. Paul, please, thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, and everyone else concerned with bringing out this remarkable book. I'm delighted to be part of it. My contribution was adapted from my weekly blog. 16 Tons is a memoir piece. It actually happened to me a few years ago. 16 tons. I began to pee blood and went to casualty. They found a tumour which had taken over my left kidney and had grown most of the way to my heart. After a big operation to remove the tumour and my kidney, I was given a surveillance scan every 6 months. For 3 years, these scans found no evidence of the cancer returning. But whenever my scan came round, my wife and I would be filled with dread. The worst time was waiting for the results. After several weeks of sleepless nights, we would be called into the cancer centre to meet my oncologist and hear the verdict. The scan shows a small lump in your liver, announced the oncologist. I swallowed hard and glanced towards my wife. She winced and squeezed my hand. It could be a capsular deposit or a metastasis, he continued. I stared quizzically at him. A metastasis is a tumour that has appeared in another part of your body, he said, helpfully. I nodded, blankly, my mind reverberating with awful images of hospital and operations. I'm sending you for an urgent MRI scan, he said. A worried week later, we returned to the cancer centre. Attending the MRI suite, I first had to fill in a questionnaire. They wanted to know whether I had any metal in my body. I could safely say no to the questions about body piercings and shrapnel wounds.
You wouldn't need that on work, no?
But I declared the sternal wires and surgical clips from my previous surgery. We sat side by side in the waiting room, holding hands. Alone in our thoughts, we hardly spoke. When my name was called by the nurse, my wife kissed me and gave me a hug. In the cubicle, I took off my clothes, then my watch and bracelet, and put on the grey hospital gown. I sat on the bench and waited. Underneath, I was naked, apart from my pants. A knock on the door, and I was called in for the scan. The MRI scanner is a long, slim tunnel surrounded by a huge magnet. I lay on the narrow bed in front of the machine, A curved panel was slapped around my midriff. Then headphones were put on me. Because MRI scanners are very noisy, the radiographer speaks to you through the headphones, but most of the time, music is playing very loudly. Move closer. I began to slide into the scanner feet first. Move your body real close. I was right inside the scanner, its grey walls just a few inches away. Feels like we're really making love. I was entombed. The scan started and loud pulses roared around me. My midriff began to get warmed. I longed for my wife, but despite the entreaties of Phyllis Nelson, I wasn't feeling like making love. Hold your breath, said the radiographer, and the pulses began again. They sounded like a deep thumping siren. People say a man is made out of mud. A poor man's made out of muscle and blood. Again, I was told to hold my breath. The pulsing reverberated around me. You load 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. I was trapped, as if I was at the bottom of a coal mine. Tennessee Ernie Ford boomed on as I panted, allowed to breathe again. St. Peter, don't you call me, because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. I was hoping against hope that the lump was nothing serious. But for the most part, I was already convinced that the cancer had returned. I didn't know for sure, of course, but I did know that there would be plenty more sleepless nights before we'd actually find out. And then what? I pictured my wife in the room next door, anxiously waiting for me. She would be doing her best to remain calm, and here I was, stuck in this tunnel of fear. When the night has come, and the land is dark, and the moon is the only light we'll see. Nearly finished, said the radiographer cheerfully. You all right? I didn't answer. I was listening to Sam Cooke. No, I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. I enjoyed it that very much. Your singing as well. It's, of course, it's a very poignant story, memoir. Okay, so we move on to Rosemary Jenkinson, who says about herself that she is Protestant, Unionist, Loyalist, poor. She lives in Willowfield in inner city East Belfast and has worked with local communities and groups of ex-prisoners and other writing projects. Rosemary's memoir of not so long ago begins on page 89. Rosemary, please.
Yeah, great to be here, flying the flag for the North. And so this was written on the 29th of May, and I don't think very much has changed, unfortunately, but there's a reference to a dentist. So that's maybe useful for Claire with her teeth problems. But anyway, here it goes. This year is cancelled. I've always thought pandemics were a thing of the past, although as a keen reader, I grew up immersed in the romance of such diseases wantonly destroying youth. In one of my childhood books, Anne of the Island, Ruby Gillis, the school beauty, finds her one true love and promptly dies of galloping consumption, as TB was known. Fortunately, TB is rare nowadays, and if you die of such a thing as consumption, it would no doubt be obesity related. I wonder if I've had or will ever have COVID-19. Back in March, I overheard receptionists at my local surgery fielding constant calls from elderly patients worried about their coughs. Are you sure it wasn't a wee bit of dust in your throat when you were drinking your tea? One receptionist asked, clearly used to batting away paranoia. Given that we're led by a serial inseminator who can't even plan far enough ahead in his sex life to use a condom, yes, I am alluding to his lover's alleged abortions, planning for the outbreak was never going to go well. The actual announcement of lockdown came as a shock. From this evening, you must stay at home, said Boris, and there was a hectic beating from inside my heart, like a winged animal trying to escape. My eyes went wet at the enormity of the changes to our lives. Who could have dreamt that our social contact would shrink to the point of waving to relatives through windows? The whole notion has a fairy tale quality to it, like Snow White in a glass coffin, or Tilda Swinton sleeping in a glass box. And what about the government directives to sing for 20 seconds while we wash our hands? What are we in, some National Theatre soap opera? Excuse the pun, but it suits the pandemic, since everything is ludicrously surreal. To think this year started with an appeal for Big Ben to chime for Brexit and ended up with tolling bells. Even our language has changed completely. The phrase to bump into someone is no longer relevant. Existent words have re-emerged with specific new meanings like shielding, cocooning, self-isolating, super spreading, and the definitions are as confusing as government advice. The one positive is that I'm becoming less concerned about super spreader shedders and more worried about developing a toothache, since all the dentists are closed. Even a chocolate bar is dangerous these days. It's hard to recall what days were like BC before coronavirus. In the evenings, I can hear street bingo being called out on a PA system to families sitting in their front gardens. I've also had fun with friends betting on when the lockdown would be lifted. But then, of course, we argued over the actual definition of lockdown release. Did we mean full or partial, a bit like a Brazilian? At least we can laugh. And to quote Shauna Casey, that's the Irish all over. They treat a joke as a serious thing and a serious thing as a joke. I've never regarded myself as a dilettante privileged writer. To me, I'm in the construction industry. And I'm a builder, building stories which will last much longer than those jerry-built social housing flats at the end of my street, erected by greedy constructors. I write in my ex-shipyard workers' parlour house, so I'm part of a working tradition. Of course, it's a modern inner city street too. And last year, the police raided a neighbouring house, which Lithuanians had converted into a crystal meth lab. Could we not have invented or have a street lab that does something useful, like invent a COVID-19 vaccine? Okay, that's it.
Excellent, excellent, very good. Rosemary, really enjoyed that. Now, Rosemary actually, in a way, fits two categories here. She held up most magnificently, I have to say, the flag for the North, and she is also our transition back to women contributors. We're going to have a group of 3 women contributors next, and it gives me an opportunity really to say that out of our 49 contributors, 22 are women. And that is a 45% ratio, I will have you know. I worked this out, and I am very happy about that because it underlines the fact that women are not only equally representative of the working class experience, but they're also equally literate, equally eloquent, and that any separation of women and men into 2 enemy groups is not reflective of their common experience at the hands of the moneyed class. Our next readers are Mary Lennon, after that Anne Mcderby Beck, and then followed by Maeve Mckenna. So we begin with Mary Lennon. Mary Lennon is for Mary Lennon, working class was Walkinstown and an aunt who gave her books. confirming that books were about other lives, never ours. She is reading her flash fiction piece, Taken by a Gangster. Mary.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. You can come as
Okay,
close as you
good.
like to
Just
the microphone and we'll...
Yes.
Okay.
I've had a couple of messages saying my internet's unstable, so hopefully it'll last. Okay?
Okay.
No. I'll begin. Okay, this is a short fiction, a dialogue between two characters, Ali, a woman, and Jack, a man. It's called Taken by a Gangster, and it was prompted by a story my mother told me about 25 years ago that stayed with me.
Oh, it looks like we've lost Mary. Mary, we can't hear you at the moment. I think what we might do, Mary, is that we would move on for now. And if you think that your internet will come back, if it comes back and it seems better, we'll let you come in again when it does. Okay, so maybe if you use the chat to let us know. But we'll just, for now, we'll move on to Anne Mcderby Beck, who was born into a working class family in rural County Laois. When she left school, she worked in a factory until being made redundant. She joined a women's writers group and is reading from her short story, Sick Day.
I had unmuted. I don't know, just...
Page
thanks
Okay.
Thanks to Jenny and Culture Matters for including my story in this lovely anthology. The quote in the story is from Terry Pratchett. She was bending down behind her screen, putting her lunchbox in her bag when the door opened. "Hello, hello, is anyone here?" said a well-to-do voice. She stood up. "Oh, I thought the office was unattended," the woman said, sounding slightly disappointed. She was about to comment, but thought better of it. "I want a residence parking permit," the woman said, "for my holiday home. I don't live here all the time, but want one for when I'm back." She did not have the form filled in, and when her documents were checked, half were missing. "We'll need the insurance certificate and a utility bill," she told the woman. She could see the woman's temper rising. She could write the script on this. "Utility bill? What on earth is a utility bill? I don't live here. I have no idea what you're talking about." She tried showing her the form where it was written exactly what was needed to get a resident parking permit. The woman was not having any of it. "This is nonsense," she spat irritably, grabbed the documents and left. Half an hour later, she was back. She produced the insurance certificate, but no utility bill. "There's a document with my PPS number. That should be sufficient for you." She pointed out the rules attached to getting a permit and why they were in place. The woman rudely demanded she just issue the permit. Realizing she was getting nowhere, she decided to ring the manager upstairs. But while she was trying to talk to her manager, the woman shouted over her, "Who are you talking to? Give me back my documents. I will speak to this person." She grabbed the documents and walked out, muttering, "You're useless," as her parting shot. She sat back down. There has to be easier ways to make a living, she thought. The door opened and the manager walked in with the woman in tow. They were chatting amicably. How different her tone was. The manager came into the office but did not meet her eye. Always a bad sign. "We'll take this document with the PPS number instead of utility bill," the manager said. She felt her face redden, her stomach lurch. "It's not a utility bill," she said quietly. The manager folded her arms. "It has her PPS number on it." So what, she thought. She turned to the counter. The woman was standing on the other side, smirking. The manager turned to go. The woman, laying it on thick, said, "Thank you so much." She receipted the money and wrote out the permit. The woman snatched it and left. She sat down at her desk and felt like crying. She decided not to ring the manager until she had calmed down a little. She ran all the usual sobering reminders through her head. They were all dickheads. Being on the bottom rung of the ladder, or a lower grade, as the media like to call it, meant they could treat you like shit. No managers are ever going to have your back when you're trying to enforce rules they made. She picked up the phone. Are we taking documents with a PPS number on it now in place of utility bill? She asked. There was a pause. I need to know if the rules have changed. There was an irritated sigh. Well, no, but we have to use our common sense. In a case like this. The woman treated me like shit, she said. The manager tutted. Well, she was nice to me. She was at the roundabout and on her road home before she stopped banging the steering wheel and shouting, bitch, bitch, bitch. She screeched up the drive and rushed into the house, dumped her bags and hastily pulled on her cycling gear. She opened the shed door, pulled out her bike, and went cycling back the road she had just driven. By the time she reached halfway along her route, she felt calmer. The manager bent the rules when it suited and then hung you out to dry. They left you wide open to be sneered at by a woman who believed the rules should not apply to her because she was rich enough to afford a holiday home. The words of her favourite writer came to her. Privilege means private law. It would serve the manager right if she was out sick tomorrow. Then she would have to do the counter on her own. As she cycled, the thought strengthened in her mind. She hated skiving off, but when you get treated like that, well, fuck it. By the time she cycled back up the drive, it was decided. Tomorrow, she would take a sick day. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Anne, very much. That's the way forward. Okay, so Mary said that the internet was back for her. There was a suggestion, Mary, that if you turn off the video camera, it might be easier on your internet. And we would just hear you read. Do you want to try that, Mary?
Okay. Well, will I start with?
Well, okay, start off with the camera if you like, and then if it seems iffy, turn off the camera. Okay.
Okay, fine. Okay, well, I'll get going quickly in case.
Yeah.
As I said, it's prompted by a story I heard years ago, and it's called Taken by a Gangster. Ali arrived late again, completely wired. Claire told me the whole thing, she said. Jack shoved the beer towards her. Oh, yeah? She took a slug. It happened 20 years ago, was all over the papers and on TV. Claire's dad went out to back a few horses, buy fags, the usual Saturday, never came back. Never? Yeah, never. Police, neighbours searched everywhere. Tracker dogs dragged the river. Her mum went on TV. Please, please come home if you're out there. You know the kind of thing. And nothing? Jack asked. Zilch. It got very hard at school for them. Your dad was taken by a gangster. That kind of crack. Eventually, police, newspapers gave up. Just her mother putting up posters for years until hope was killing them. Jack frowned. It explains Claire being so weird. Yeah, she agreed. Then they moved to Dublin, started over. Ali finally noticed his empty glass. Another pint? Yes, please, he said. She ordered, then jumped straight back into it. Anyways, one afternoon, Claire leaves work early. Someone cancelled, pure fluke. She's on the Piccadilly line, watching this boy reading Harry Potter. Reminds her of her nephew. At Arsenal, a man who's standing up moves, takes the boy's hand to leave. She glances up, and there he feckin' is. Who? Jack says. The father. Jesus. Older, a bit grey, Claire said, but she'd no doubts. She got up, followed them all the way until they arrived at their house. They were about to go inside, and out it came. One single word loudly. Dad. And, Jack asked. He froze, then slowly turned, said, Madeline? That's her look-alike sister. Claire, she said. Nobody moved. 3 statues standing staring. Did he say no? She walked away. Oh, eye for an eye? Jack asked. No. She saw a brick in the garden, decided to smash his head in. Watch the blood gushing down the path. Oh, come on, Jack said. She was dead serious, in a rage zone. Could have done it. But the boy was watching her, like he kind of knew. She said she couldn't do it to him. Jack sat, let it sink in.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'm so glad your internet came back and you could do it with a camera. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
Good, and nice to have you. So we'll now move on to Maeve Mckenna, who is originally from Dublin. She grew up with her parents, 5 siblings, a dog, 2 budgies, and a goldfish in a 3-bed terraced house in Cabra. We hear her read, I Want to Go Home. Maeve.
Hi everybody, hi Jenny. Hope you can hear me. Same problems with internet here as well. Thanks for being a part of allow me to be a part of this. Great opening speeches from everybody. This I want to dedicate to my parents who worked really hard to bring us up. So it's called I Want to Go Home. I want Casey's manged, flea-infested mongrel to chase me as far as O'Dwyer's unhinged gate. Mother waiting on the doorstep, smoke from a silk-cut red issuing like language from her lips. Father educated by the evening press crossword, my sister in casualty. I want my brothers wedged against Venetian blinds when headlocks are conversations, and my favourite dead aunt buying greasy takeaways to help my mother. I want the 22A bus to Cabra rattling inside my bones, lungs wheezing inside the fumes of Poolbeg Towers. I want street signs vandalised with paint, chewing gum strewn footpaths, and a wheel of spike locked to a railway fence. I want buildings of 2 up, 2 down, crow-stalked chimneys, smog, heat bouncing grey mist off concrete, high-rise skylines, piss-stained lanes, and the stench of the low-tide Liffey in my nostrils. I want the squeal of street cats mating on broken bottle-topped walls, wood-chip crates of Jaffa oranges at 5 a.m. in the fruit markets, stacked like a Southsider's treehouse, high heels of fearless youth on cobblestones in Smithfield, Croke Park and the Dubs defeated. I want kids skidding on amber oak leaves on O'Connell Street, the Oarsman Early house with watery Guinness heads, Leeson strip on New Year's Eve, rancid wine and drug-fueled dancing. I want the aloofness of Cleary's window display, Moore Street traders, the threat of severed fish heads in a pram, and mouldy water in the cross in the Garden of Remembrance. I want old women battering rugs on washing lines, Glasnevins, withered wreaths, bonfires melting power lines, the risky Phoenix Park at dusk. My father downing pints of slop at closing time in the 5 Lamps every Saturday night. I want the Beehive newsagents to sell 1 more loose fag, Steen's Butchers a pound of offal. I want trees fenced off over tarmac pavements, the ominous church, barbed wire school railings, and the beatings. I want Erris Road, white, weather-glazed front door with yellow daffodils in stained glass circles, 1 mildewed toilet, a dilapidated kitchenette, and geyser moist windows. The shadow of grandfathers in suits hung inside frames in the narrow hallway. I want nicotine-laced curtains, the smell of cabbage, twin tub flushing last night's vomit from sheets, final reminders unopened on the doormat, a scraggy Christmas tree at a tilt on the beige shag pile carpet. I want orange ropes knotted to poles, wooden pegs with wire knuckles clinging to bell-bottom jeans as they swing wildly over the neighbour's breeze block wall. I want the bag of Willie Quigley's new season spuds turning to seed in the shed beside the litter of abandoned kittens. I want my mother's slap, father's pen, my sister crying on the top bunk, my brother's bruised eye socket. I want the bones of my first dead dog buried in the back garden. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Maeve. That was excellent, and I'm sure it echoes for very, very many people. It's one of these things where I think it is true for a lot of the stories that while the individual experience speaks, it has so many echoes for so many people, and I think that's true for yours as well. And thank you for reading it. So we go on to another woman. It's not that we are leaving women here, but we are changing our theme, let's say. We are going to Victoria Mcnulty next, who joins us from Scotland. She represents all those contributors who reflect on the experience of emigration, both first and second generation. Before I call on Victoria, I would like to say that this experience is deeply ingrained in both anthologies, the poetry one as well as this prose one. In this prose collection, it is highlighted in texts that were written in Irish. I would like to stress that at this point that the contributions in Irish are very valuable and important to both anthologies, as they stand for a long tradition of working people's writings and are essential to this narrative. Victoria Mcnulty is a poet and writer from the East End of Glasgow. Her maternal family emigrated from Ulster to Glasgow to work as factory labourers in the north and east end of the city. And Victoria reads for us from White Horses, which begins on page 125. Victoria.
Hello, thanks for having me. Can you hear me? Can you hear okay?
Victoria, is there anything you can do for the sound? Your microphone.
Better? Is that better?
That's much better, yeah.
Cool. Hi, thanks for having me, because obviously I'm not Irish. But obviously in Glasgow there's a massive Irish diaspora, and I kind of wanted to write about that because for obviously historical and social reasons, that a lot of people of Irish descent in Glasgow, they don't know where their families are from. They don't quite know the situation that kind of led for them to be there. And what that means is when someone dies, it's not just the death of a person you have, it's kind of the death of that last thread as well. And I wanted to write about that. In 1995, you would pull fags for a green and white packet with cabbage slurped in the stove, your ubiquitous potatoes boiling ever translucent. At tea time, we would push them around our plates as a family. I would stab them with a fork in your distraction, hold them up to my eye line and try to watch Brookside through the membranes, only to pop them in my mouth as the gaze of rage descended. These were our best days. I loved every inch of you as you puffed consulates in the kitchen with an everbrew of strong black tea, adorned in a cleaner's apron, although you never seemed to work. We would flick magazines you'd bought me, Gallagher Brothers on every page, so handsome you'd say Black Irish, like that was a matter of fact. As smoke plumed from flaky lips, you'd paint pictures of your father settled as a pauper in Glasgow's Garngad, his strong jaw and stern temperament. How, with a drink in him, he would terrorise you, as Irishmen often do. He'd confide how you'd wished to take him home before he died to taste the salt air and touch the Ulster soil. Still, we never talked about Ireland in our house, not really. When white heat ripped a bomb through the 6 o'clock news, twisted metal and zombies walking with bleeded-headed hysteria, shocked and destitute. When ambulances and stretchers scattered the charred precincts, Queen's English accents shaping their usual excuses of incendiary devices, escalation and retaliation. You sat static in your favourite chair, raised yourself, cough hobbled to the telly and switched it off at the wall. The IRA are killing ordinary people now, you wheezed. And only now I understand you were too crestfallen to look. And when you died, I looked for you, filling the blanks with books. The first woman in my family to go to university, I devoured 4 years of Ulster cycles and place names and protests. I searched for you in the remains of paragraphs and page breaks, spotlit and dusty libraries. I'd let my digits dance the cheekbones of old photographs, trying to touch some semblance of you. Now I could exist in these margins, but it wasn't where I belong. So most weekends we would march our old stomping grounds, Gallagate through to the Calton, green and white scarves surrounded by men. Their hands and voices hoarse from building site roars, bow-legged, their eyes a wild sparkle like yours. I'd hold my drunk chin high and my insides would rise as the stadium came into sight. And as the show swelled, a tin whistle would herald us past the Jock Stein stand, milk fingers pouring a slow rendition of the leaving of Liverpool. It rose with the white heat of fried onions and police horse shite in the ether. And in the pub we would warm to stories of a land that was not our home and an aching that Scotland wasn't either. We sat squished comfortably, thigh to thigh, knee to knee, and punters would duck behind tables at the ring of a phone, fearful that it was our girlfriend calling from home. And in the calm of our storm, old men would drip water from drams, heat hands on unlit fires as our wives cooed a tune swaying tipsily, sequined and glittered with floral perfume. The rough diamond glamour always reminded me of you. Yet as our city changed, their serenade faded too, and my wildness tamed as I grew. I gave birth to a Scottish son with an Irish name and a heart-shaped face like yours. Now it's been 25 years since we spoke last, smoke shrouded in your industrious kitchen, coughs and cooking lacing the stove warm air, and I'm still writing to you, still seeing you in every page, tripping over every cracked pavement, and I was wrong to rummage for you in the past, as I suspect you would have told me too. You see, you were never lost to me, but I had to extend my arms to Ireland and journey the choppiest of seas, to taste the beauty and bitterness of a country misplaced, to find you as you were, both glamorous and broken and twisted and loving, sacked chimney smoking in our soot pot scullery. And I never once recognised that my searching was grief. Now I see you lived in my story all along. May you always reside in my pages. Thanks. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Victoria. That was very moving as well. And I'm sure it echoes for people who have experience of emigration, which many people do have. And it's a theme that comes up again and again in both of our anthologies. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So next we have 3 Dublin voices, Dublin writers. 2 men and a woman, not that I am counting. We have Alan O'Brien, then Carl Parkinson, and then Moya Roddy. Alan O'Brien is a bricklayer by trade and comes from a family of bricklayers. His uncle James O'Brien has also contributed to this book. He's actually in Australia representing an older generation of emigrants. Alan was raised in Finglas, Ballymun, and he has published widely. His story is Culture, and it is on page 138. Alan, could I ask you to come forward, please?
Thank you, Jenny. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
yeah.
perfect, we can.
Yeah, this being part of this is 2 points of pride for me, and one is to be included with all of yous, and the other is to be included with my uncle, the actual influence and the reason why I'm writing, you know. So rather than reading from my own, I'm going to read from his. And
Right, yeah.
I'd like to just inform everyone that he has a memoir called Against the Wind, Memoir of a Dissonant Dubliner, and there'll be a web page either next week or the week after where you can buy a hard copy of the book. And I'd like to just dedicate this to his sister and my aunt, Peggy Doyle, who after she's in St. Francis Hospice at the moment after battling a form of cancer for 20 years. And Peg is a real working class hero, completely unconscious of it, so a real one, you know. Anyway, this is called The Rebel Meg. At the end of the emergency, as World War II was described in Ireland, there was a renewed effort by the Dublin Corporation to tackle slum clearances. People were moved to sprawling housing estates on the edges of the city. And so they swapped overcrowding and squalor for more space and fresh air, but lost the strong community spirit of the old town. After we moved to Milltown, I had lost touch with Meg Hegarty. Her family had chosen to move to Cabaret on the north side of the city when the house they had lived in was due for demolition. We had slowly drifted apart before the housing resettlement. Sure, you've grown much too serious for me, Sean, she said. All that old Irish Ireland stuff is not for me. 4 years after we had been all moved away from our childhood streets, I began to attend dances, as did many of the youth of that generation. It was a very popular pastime, especially at weekends, and there were many of us that could dance extremely well. From time to time, I met Meg by chance at the Four Provinces Dance Hall in Harcourt Street. Fancy seeing you here, she said. I would have thought you were more of a Cayley hopper. I'm that too, Meg, but I also like modern music and even traditional jazz. So I suppose that in your eyes makes me a bit of an enigma. Jesus, she rolled her eyes at my use of the last word. On the edge of the dance floor, she was usually the centre of attention, amidst a group of visiting American sailors, or more than often than not, a group of African male medical students. She had a penchant for unusual men, as she would say, and was quite uninhibited about the company she kept. For the Moors, the times, and the Ireland that we lived in, Meg disregarded the conventions and ignored the gossips. Red hair cascading to her shoulders and an off-the-shoulder gypsy blouse matched with a full floating skirt, Meg would strut her stuff to the strains of La Comparsita or The Blue Tango or Pat Moran's arrangement of Bolero. There she goes again, after a taste of the black pudding, I suppose, Jack Loudon said with a leer as he watched that tango sensuously with a tall, athletic black man. Jesus, look at her, she's welded onto him. Ah, now, sure, you're only jealous, Jack, because she never dances like that with you, I said. Get out, Sean. I'm off for a drink at the bar. Are you coming? I declined to join him and instead stood at the edge of the dance floor and watched the dancers. As Meg passed in a perfect tango twirl, she caught my eye and mouted "Stay there" over her partner's shoulder. When the dance finished, she walked over to me. Ah, Sean, the very man I wanted to see, she smiled. Take me upstairs to the bar. I want to talk to you. We sat at a quiet table and straight out she asked me if I knew Councillor Murphy. Of course I do, I replied. Is that old lecture bothering you? Councillor John Joe Murphy was a member of the Dublin County Council, and it was rumoured that if he had an attractive wife and if she was nice to him, he would get you an advance in the housing list queue. It was even said that if she was extra nice to him, he could get you a steady job in one of the council departments. What was more than rumoured and had been substantiated was that he'd impregnated the housemaid in the same month as he had his wife, and that the girl had been sent to England to be looked after, as it was termed. Anyway, I haven't panting for me, Meg grinned wickedly, but I need a hard man for the next stage of me plan, and I think you're the man for the job. She leaned across the table and patted my hand, and I caught a glimpse of those full breasts that excited me so much in our teenage games. Murphy was a wheeler and dealer who stayed just inside the law in his business activities. My father said he'd been part of the black market racket during the war years, but that he was well connected politically and could pass himself off as a pillar of the community. Why me, for heaven's sake? I asked incredulously, but not without a hint of interest creeping into my voice. Because you are well known for taking a stand for a good cause, and you're not just a green flag Republican or a holy Joe either, like a lot of the rest of them. And you, Meg, since when have you joined the ranks of rebels? And now, Sean, you know that in my own way, I've always been a bit of a rebel. And you know as well as I do, there are more ways than one to fight hypocrites. Ellipses. ...
Thank you very much, Alan. That was very well read. And thank you also to James, who I know will be watching this recording later. Okay, so we have another Dublin man coming up, Carl Parkinson. He has lived in the inner city council flats of Dublin for 40 years. He is the author of 3 poetry collections and a novel. Before becoming a writer and a creative writing teacher, he worked on building sites and factories as a stagehand and as an industrial cleaner. He is reading from his piece, Dino and the Boys from the Block, which begins on page 173. Carl, please.
Hi. How's it going, everyone? Can you hear me?
Hello, Carl. How are you?
Yeah. Can you all hear me? Yeah.
We can hear you, see you. You
Cool.
can go.
Right. Good to see us all and hear you, so I'll just go straight into it anyway. The green, stoned, mad eyes of Dean Baker looked up and down the street. He spat phlegm, almost hitting an old woman walking with her shopping trolley dragging behind. When she harumphed, he sniggered and took a long, loud drag on a joint, then blew smoke out his hyena mouth, smiled, looked back at the street, spat again. Dino occupied the street most days of the week. The boys and him sold cannabis, coke, crack, and heroin. Dean watched his patch, watched his cohorts, watched out for Garda, watched out for rats, watched for customers, watched the girls go by, watched for trouble, watched the street. 2 skinny junkies walked onto the street. One had a light grey tracksuit on with the hood pulled up. The other was wearing a green Nike bubble jacket that was too big for him, and black tracksuit bottoms with unknowable stains on them. Grey tracksuit walked ahead, his eyes darting about the street, his neck and head bobbing like a strung-out pigeon. Bubble jacket walked painfully slow behind, scratching his inner thigh, the back of his head, his face. He spoke words to himself, his friend, to nobody in particular, mumbling interminable incantations to the wind. Dean spotted the pair and seeing cash money walking into his domain. He whistled. Grey tracksuit looked up. Greencoat's head slowly turned side to side. He squeaked out the words. Where's that? Over there, Dino's out, said Grey tracksuit. Ah, lovely. Dean sprinted and met the twosome. Why he's looking for heads? 4 bags of white and 2 brown. 4 white, 2 brown. Sound. Dean let out a call and an obese teenage youngster named Chunk came out of a garden from across the street, looked over at Dean and nodded. A slim boy with a face like a rodent crossed with a man whose name was Rizzer. He seemed to emerge from a crack in the ground and stood a few feet away against the wall of the corner of the street's entrance. Dino said 4 to Rizzer and held up 2 fingers to Chunk. Right, they'll sort you out, lads. The junkies walked over to Rizzer and Grey tracksuit handed the cash for the drugs. Rizzer took the money for all 6 bags, handed over 4 small bags of wrapped heroin and said, go over to him and he'll give you the bags of white, yeah? Grand, nice one, pal, said Grey tracksuit. The junkies walked over to Chunk and he handed the 2 bags to them. Deal done. Dean watched. Business was all good. He took out his phone and put on a video of a versatile song, bopped his head to the tune, looked, toked at his joint, and went back to watching the street. He'd wait for half an hour, then head down to the Glimman to meet his older cousin Robbie for a pint and to talk business. The lads would keep the shop open while he was away. He took another drag of the joint, hopped, spat, whistled at the next customer. Dean took 2 quick pulls, blew smoke out his nostrils, handed the joint to Horsehead, then punched Horsehead in the stomach just as he was taking a drag of the joint. Horse coughed and spluttered and exhaled a burst of smoke. Tricky, Chunk and Rizzer all broke into laughter. You fucking prick, you Dino, said Horse, still coughing a bit, his eyes watery and red. Ah, shut up, Horse, I'm only buzzing off you. Horsehead spat a greenish blob of flame onto the ground, laughed and said, let me take this drag properly and don't mess, you fucking sap. He took a big pull on the joint, blew smoke into Dane's face, then handed the joint to Chunk. Chunk went and sat on the pat, lowering his large frame to the ground, avoiding the horse's spit. He smoked the joint slowly, relishing the pulls he took on it, letting hardly any smoke out on exhalations. Fucking swallow the smoke. Look at that, boys. Hardly anything comes out of him, said Rizzo. Stood there, topless, a tattoo of his dead brother's face on his chest. It looked like Robert De Niro, and it looked like his dead brother too. I like his dead brother was being played by De Niro in the movie. He had a number of other tats as well, random shit. A spiral on his shoulder, a dog's head with a dagger stuck in it on his left forearm, a naked woman with a pistol between her legs was on his right forearm, and across his belly the words "Made in Dublin" with stars on each end of the script for no apparent reason. Chunk handed the joint to Rizzo, and Rizzo took it between his finger and thumb and held it like a big cigar, even though it was the butt end of a spliff, and he made a big show of taking drags, noiselessly sucking and then extending his arm out and waving the butt and then hoofing the butt down to the roach end, burning his fingertips a little, and then he dropped the butt on the ground and stuttered out, and then watched them and said, Jesus, Rizzo, you swear you are smoking a big cone the way you're going on there. That's how I smoke all me joints, Dino. You know me, pal. We all know you. That's the problem, said Chunk from below. Shut up, you're lucky we let your fat arse know any of us. Laughter, smirks. I'm so blessed to know yous, lads. I really am. I'll leave it there.
Thanks a million, Carl. That was excellent. What crossed my mind as you were reading, and it applies again to really to everybody who contributed, that only people who have lived the experience can convincingly write about it, and that you can always tell the fraud from the real thing, can't you, in writing? So certainly no fraud with Carl Parkinson. We can immediately recognize the authenticity, as I think we can in all the other contributions as well. So thank you, Carl. We move on to Moya Roddy, who also grew up in a working class area of Dublin. She left school at 17. The idea of becoming a writer was not on the radar, and what compelled her was the fact that she never came across anyone like herself in the books she read. And I think this is something that is echoed over and over again, that in establishment mainstream culture, the working class is quite simply written out. It doesn't exist. And if other people write about the working class, it is never authentic, as I just said. So in that sense, Moya is, what Moya says in her bio is absolutely true for so many of the authors who are here tonight. So Moya will be reading from her story, They Also Serve Who Only.
Okay, thank you, Jenny, and thanks. It's great being part of this collection or this anthology. And just thank you, Mike, and also the wonderful speeches at the beginning and all the contributions. And they also serve who only. It comes from the last line of a poem by Milton. He wrote it when he was in his 40s and he was going blind and he was trying to think what he could do with his life. So the last line is, they also serve who only stand and wait. And so that the idea is, that's maybe the idea for this story. Who on earth could it be at this hour? Maeve Cummins wonders as the doorbell chimes. Picking up the tray of scones she's just finished making, she shoves them in the oven. When she was younger, she'd have an apple pie in there as well, already bubbling. These days, she hasn't the heart. She'll have a couple of them at her 11s. They always taste better the first day. The bell goes again, and after checking the temperature, she tiptoes out to the bottom of the hallway, peers anxiously through the frosted glass on the front door. She can see by the shape it's a man, but she's not going to open it. If it was someone she knew, they'd have phoned. As she slips back into the kitchen, it dawns on her. It's probably one of the protesters. Loretta in the new flats had told her that one of them had called on her the previous day. Very well spoken, inquiring whether she'd like to join the picket. They have a rota, would you believe? Well, who's ever on the other side of that door has another thing coming if you think she's going to stand on a picket line. What would the neighbours say? even if her legs were up to it, which they aren't, not with varicose veins the size of champagne corks. According to Loretta, they want to involve more local people. It makes sense, she'd explained. The more locals, the better, gives it legitimacy. Maeve hadn't been too sure what she meant. They've been out there a whole week, she thinks, returning to the kitchen, in all sorts of weather. Supposed to be summer, but that's only winter by another name. She thinks she spotted Mrs. Byrne and the good-looking husband of the couple who moved into number 21, but she couldn't be sure. She doesn't like to gawk, and she doesn't walk slowly either, for fear one of them might make a beeline for her. Not that they're pushy, handing out leaflets mostly. She took one the first day out of politeness. Water charges. Nothing wrong with that. They shouldn't be allowed. Especially not in Ireland, she snorts, running the tap a moment before filling the kettle. Isn't water bucketing out of the heavens no matter what season it is? Coming down with the stuff, and now they want to charge us for it. A gift of God. Nature, anyway. And Loretta told her we pay for it already in our taxes or PRSI or whatever. There's no flies on her. Studies things, although she never went further than her intercert. Maeve herself has never had any time for politics or politicians. She'd love to see them trying to live on the excuse of a pension she gets. Opening the tea caddy, she puts a spoon of leaves in the pot. Hard to believe she's retired 7 years. Turning off the oven, she takes out the scones, arranges them on a rack. The bell goes again, but when she looks, whoever it was is already leaving. Funny the way people often give the bell a last ring before they go, she thinks, nipping into the sitting room to see if she's right. Maeve scrutinises the man loping up the path. He's a nice-looking fella, youngish. Why isn't he working, she thinks. All the same, he could be tucked up in bed instead of wearing out shoe leather walking in circles. A few of the water charges people were interviewed on the news the night before, not the ones from around here. This lot were from Cork. Groups seem to be springing up all over the country. She supposes it's good. People standing up for things. Somebody has to. Nothing's free, our father always said. Someone has to pay for it. He'd wink when he said that, and she knew he meant people like them, not the rich, who in his book paid for nothing. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Moya. That was great. We are now on to our last two readers for tonight. We have Jim Ward first, and then we have Anne Waters. We begin with Jim. Jim is from a working class family in Galway. He achieved a scholarship and studied engineering. He has nonetheless shared the fate, I think, of many who went to college, experienced periods of precarious employment and of unemployment. He has published poetry and short stories in both Irish and English. Jim contributed a cartoon as well as a short story to the book, and he is now going to read a section from Evelyn for us, which begins on page 197. Jim, please.
Hello, you can hear me, yeah?
We can, perfectly.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear and see you
Very
perfectly.
good. Well, congratulations, Jenny, on the anthology. Good work.
Well,
I'd like to congratulate Claire on her speech. Made me very envious there that I couldn't call it like that. But can I just say that while I do come from a working class family, I grew up in Salt Hill. So anybody, my family, my mother's people were in Salt Hill going back 100 years. But anybody who knows Galway, Salt Hill is not a working class area. So while we had cousins in Merview and Chantala, the council estates, guys I went to school with and around with in Salt Hill wouldn't have been working class really. But as regards going to university, I did a scholarship to engineering purely for a job. And while I like maths, physics, and still do, I don't think I opened a book on engineering in my, which explains my precarious existence since then. But also, I'd like to say that I read loads of literature and other books and hung around with people doing arts. With the story Evelyn by James Joyce, their lecturer said to them that there might have been more waiting at the other end of the bowl, at the end of the journey to South America for the girl for Evelyn than CI. And that prompted me to write this, my take on Evelyn by James Joyce, and I call it Evelyn. Evelyn, right? You're gorgeous, Paul told her. She did not believe him, but as she went from table to table, self-consciously smiling, Walking awkwardly, a young doe, she'd catch the men looking up from their tables, feast their eyes on her, then look away again, when she would exchange a smile. The men, bus drivers and porters from the station round the corner, into the carvery lunch, solid grub of meat with potatoes and veg served with thick gravy. She collected sloppy glasses and plates with chewed gristle or unwanted vegetables left on them, absent-mindedly, but she awoke from her dreaming by these men giving her the once-over. She hadn't attracted that kind of attention before. It was all new to her, and she felt both flattered and uneasy by it. Back home in Krakow, this never happened. The Railway Arms, where she had landed a job as a waitress, was very different from the seedy bars and musty beer halls of her hometown, with their whiff of desperation. Here it was all plush carpet and refurbished provincial grandeur, old-fashioned respectability with the crude facelifts of newfound prosperity. The old photographs on the walls told her a lot. Ireland still has the faith, Father Jersey told her father, and the peace of the grace of God, he added. A minimum wage as well, he informed him, jerking his head forward with emphasis. No, in Poland she never received this kind of attention. So she walked awkwardly from table to table, trying to deflect leers, admiring or not, from the patrons. I knew this would happen. She had no qualifications. At school, the teachers had given up on her. Now, Evelyn, can you answer this one? And when she couldn't, it was, now just read your book to yourself, Evelyn, as the teacher concentrated on the rest of the class. But she had learned English. At 21, she did not remember the old days in her native Poland, the days of the socialist state, where everybody, no matter how backward, had a job or position in society. Her father, a devout Catholic, often told her about those days. The communists were bad people, he would say. They had no God. He did not like communists, though he had held a permanent job under the regime, and under it he would not have had to send his daughter to a foreign country as he had her. In the afternoons, when the lunchtime crowd went back to work, a different clientele took over. Mostly retired men with ruddy faces and bloodshot eyes, facing on the screen, and their eyes glued to their newspapers, quietly muttering to themselves and each other, scribbling out betting chits for the neighbourhood bookie, their voices gradually getting louder as the drinks took effect. Then they joked with her. She made them feel young again and desirable. And when they got a little bit tipsy, one of them would hold her in her arms and they'd do a little set around the floor. Yes, she made them feel young again. So she walked awkwardly from table to table, trying to deflect leers, admiringly or not, from the patrons. She met Paul at a party. At 21, she had never been a man in her life before. Mona, her best friend, often told her she should be more confident with boys. Come on, Evelyn, boys are like putty in girls' hands. But she was looking for companionship and security in this new country, and Paul was all the business. He was 25 and even said he had his own business. She didn't know what type of business he had, but he was forever answering calls to his mobile phone. His manner took on a sense of urgency whenever it would ring and he'd walk off to take the call private. Then there was the time when he had borrowed 20 euros from her, which remained unpaid. He regularly went away, to England on business, he would explain when asked. They had not slept together yet due to her religious convictions, and this had not deterred Paul from seeing her. She thought this was good. Then there was Paul's politics. For someone born in a country once called himself socialist, with the father virulently anti-communist, she had made a strange relationship with a businessman who declared himself a socialist, and even brought to some meetings. The obscure left-wing political group he belonged to was called the Irish Revolutionary Workers' Movement. Paul insisted they were not all socialists who had governed her own country for 40 years. We are not Stalinists, he would insist. We want a workers' and small farmers' republic all of Ireland. This struck her as odd. She had often heard of a workers' republic, but not of a small farmers' republic as well. It must be an Irish thing, she thought, calculating that it would not do to ask any questions. For they are a childlike people, always wanting to know what others thought of them. How do you like our town, they would ask. What do you think of our cathedral, of our new hospital, and so on? And they'd be downright racist too, she thought, remembering the time she heard herself and Moya being called dumb Polacks.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to get a COVID test for my car. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So with our last reader, Anne Waters, we actually return full circle to a related theme to the one that Patrick Bojan started off with. She is going to read from her story St. Stephen's Day, which tackles what can only be called a shocking misnomer, the mother and baby homes, a topic that has also haunted the poetry collection and of course is something that will never go away, like the clerical child abuse will never go away until it is properly confronted. It is something that I'm sure will always stay with the people affected, and we see this reflected in the anthology as we did in the poetry anthology. So Anne Waters, please.
Hello, can you see me?
We can see you and we can hear you.
Okay. Goramaha got Jenny and Michael. I am honoured to be one of your contributors. I have an abridged version of my story, St. Stephen's Day. I have to say I have a master's in social justice, and so the position of women and how they've been socialised is something of great interest to me. So I'll start now anyway. My mother's treasures box was but a shoe box, tied tightly with string, but was always private. Every St. Stephen's Day, after our compulsory church visit, she retired to her home and spent an hour alone. I now opened the lid of the box, excitement building, anxious to behold its secrets. Tattered birth certs, old school reports, baby bangles. I could just not see what was so special until I spied a pair of blue baby booties, delicately crocheted with tiny ribbons now slightly frayed. One little boot held a wispy fragment of soft, downy, fair hair. I held them gently, poignant in their sad simplicity, as the harsh December sunlight streaming through the window sketched how threadbare and faded they now were. I determined to ascertain what mystery lay within, and instinctively was aware Aunt Ellen would know. Her usual greeting was an instant hug, but that day she halted, taken by surprise when she saw what lay in my hand. Stunned, she turned away, but not before I saw the tears well in her eyes and slowly descend her cheeks. Gently, I steered her towards the table. Taking hold of her hands, I massaged her gnarled fingers, silently pleading, and haltingly, hesitantly, she proceeded to tell me about a mother I never knew. Well, as you know, Kate, we were reared in Donegal. You need to understand the times, what Ireland, especially Donegal, was like in the 1950s. Of course, we knew the mechanics of sex. We lived on a farm, after all. But sex between a man and a woman was shrouded in secrecy, preserved for marriage. Every Saturday night, we went to the church social. Ellen smiled as she continued. The lights were always blazing so brightly, and dancing was never too close. It was quite normal then to have a lad walk you home, and if you'd a bike, well, so much the better. Innocent times, how innocent we were, believing without question what we were told and accepting our assigned place. There was something special about your mother. She was only 16, but when she entered the room, all the lads turned towards her. It was in the swish of her hair and the swing of her hips, the curve of her smile. Ellen sipped her tea slowly, her eyes glazed, lost in a faraway time, reliving difficult and heartbreaking memories. It was St. Patrick's night, she finally whispered, and I just didn't feel well, and I told Sarah I had to go home. I knew any number of lads would see her up the laneway, and I sank into bed without any worries. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I was awoken by a distraught Sarah. She was covered in mud, scratched and bleeding, with tears streaming down her face. The notion of hopping into a shower didn't exist in those days, so I crept silently into the yard and filled a bucket with cold water. I sponged her down myself while attempting to soothe her, terrified we might disturb our parents. Secrecy was paramount. Afterwards, a light just went out in Sarah and she hung her head in shame. She said she felt grubby, that she must have led the lad on and forced him to commit sin. We were indoctrinated to believe it was always the woman who had to have control, and if she had, no man would do wrong. We also thought that losing virginity before marriage rang a death knell for the future. We were strangled by a church's teaching that subordinated and devalued women. I was preparing to travel to London to Aunt Mary, but within 3 months I knew Sarah had to go too. I was astounded how our parents agreed quite quickly. I think they must have gleaned something was amiss, but nothing was said. Shame, you see, the need to hold your head high mattered above all else. We travelled to Dublin, but as soon as Mary laid eyes on Sarah, she knew she was expecting. Ellen sighed deeply, pausing, before steeling herself to continue. Mary knew unmarried mothers in England fared little better than those in Ireland, so we left her in a convent. Of course, at that time, we didn't know the reality of the Magdalene laundries. A sigh of deep despair escaped Ellen. She paused. I was aware of how difficult this was for her, but every time she stopped for breath or took a moment to process a memory, I felt a surge of impatience. It was essential I hear the full story, and as quickly as possible. I loved London, continued Ellen, and the only blight was the constant worry over your mother. The baby was due in late December, and I had to be there for Sarah. Ellen reached for the booties and caressed the frayed ribbons. She sniffed the frayed strands of hair, one stray curl gently weaving round her little finger, the faded wool now sodden with her sobs. I made these, she said. One is a bit bigger than the other, but Sarah loved them. Sarah's little boy was born on St. Stephen's Day, so she named him after the saint. Little Stephen was so beautiful, but I only held him for a few minutes. What happened to him? I impatiently interrupted. Stephen, whispered Ellen. Poor little Stephen just disappeared. His cot was empty one morning. Gone to a good home, they said. Sarah had no chance to say goodbye or hold him one last time. That broke our heart and spirit. You know, Sarah never questioned the church or the nuns and their view of women, believing their denunciation was justified and her violation was her own fault. My once bright and sparkly sister metamorphosed into a dull, critical, and scrupulous individual. That was the mother you knew, someone who hung her head in contrition and shame, but that was not my sister Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Anne. You broach a very difficult subject. There are sometimes no words for many of the things that have been raised in this anthology. You and the other writers have found words for that, and that is the only way we're going to be able to raise the issues, keep them in the public domain, and by naming them, try and do something about it. So, and that applies not only to the women in the Magdalene laundries, what happened to them. I am talking about many issues that were raised tonight, that have been written about, that are collected in the anthology. And I think that is exactly why the anthology is so important as a collective voice. We have gone over our time, despite everybody being so disciplined about the time limit. But I think we had a wonderful launch. I really do. I think it's been such a marvelous experience to bring everybody together. And I would like to thank not only all the readers, I would like to thank Jerry Murphy again. I would like to thank Claire Daly and Mike Quill for being part of this. I would like to thank the people who dropped in to see our launch, to witness our launch, even if they were not involved as writers. So thank you very, very much to everybody. I think it is an important book, and I thank you all for helping to spread the word about it. So good night and take care, as they say.